Hello and good day. I am Mr. J. Today, I'm going to talk about codependency, a little bit about codependency 101, and maybe some tips and techniques we can do to address it if either we are or we're in a relationship with somebody who is codependent. I always like to start my classes with a corny dad joke. And today, even though I don't have a dad joke, I will say um, I went to buy some camouflage pants, but I couldn't find any. But All right, if you can take two deep breaths with me, in through the nose, out through the mouth, as slow as you'd like. Feel free to close your eyes if you prefer, or do this however you feel safe. So, and one more time, in through the nose, and slowly out through the mouth. All right, so codependency. Codependency is a stress-induced pattern of behavior that dictates how a person treats one another and how he or she allows that person to influence him or her. The codependent obsesses over the person and seeks to control them. Codependency is more than a relationship problem. Wounds of codependency affect our psyche and individual development. Make no mistake, it's to no one's fault of their own. Codependency is adaptive, so it's something that we've needed to put on this costume, this uniform we've needed to put on. So it's adaptive, and it helped us to survive growing up in a dysfunctional family system. But that change cost us our individuality. Um, it costs us our authenticity. It costs us our sense of self, which of course affects, the quality of life in the future, and of course in the here and now. Codependency is a serious maladaptation to life brought on by dysfunctional parenting, especially when we are young. Now, we can form codependency, although some professionals prefer to call it a trauma bond, when we're younger. But codependency can develop in many types of relationship. It doesn't really matter if it's a parent or child, spouse, partner, coworker, boss. Codependent relationships, don't discriminate, and they run the gamut. Codependency occurs anywhere where there is an imbalance of power and one or both of the people in the relationship need to be needed. It's almost like if you don't call a codependent back, they'll almost hyperventilate and get very anxious. To a codependent, their person that they're codependent upon is almost like the oxygen they breathe. And it's almost like they'll get a panic attack or suffocate if they don't breathe in that person. Make no mistake, codependent individuals don't form relationships. They actually take hostages. And I often say it's kind of similar to a narcissist where they don't form relationships. They take prisoners. However, a codependent doesn't have the grandiose tendencies like a narcissist does, but that's a whole other class. Trauma, as we know, is not an event. It's an experience. It's an emotional response. Trauma includes everything. Trauma includes events, whether it could be a betrayal, could be an assault, it could be even a natural disaster, a fire, anything at all that threatens our life and overwhelms our coping mechanisms. Serious mental health consequences emerge if we don't cope well with a traumatic experience. We can form mental health condition because of being able to come to terms or not being able to come to terms with a traumatic experience. Many trauma-based mental health conditions may arise. Some of you watching probably have experienced this if you've experienced trauma, and that can be anxiety, that could be disorders, even addictions, substance abuse, depression, CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic distress, or obviously CPTSD, but also including what we're talking about today, which is codependency. Trauma can set us up for codependency by destroying our self-esteem and our self-image. Damage done to the quote self is deep because of the possible neglect when what we needed was comfort and the feeling of belonging. So instead of, well, I'll get into that in a minute. The need to belong is such a powerful force in our minds that we do not receive in childhood. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that's one of the basic needs. We need to feel belonged. Um, if we do not receive the feeling of belonging in childhood, we grow into adults who search for it either in relationships that match what we knew when we were growing up, or other unhealthy attachments or relationships. So the need to be needed and to take care of someone else is very strong because it almost hits us at a core root, a fundamental root, and it's overwhelming. So, how to tell if someone you love is a codependent, and if this matches somebody you love, maybe you could also look in the mirror and say, is this anything to do with, my tendencies? Although one might think identifying someone who is codependent would be easy, that's not always the case. This is because codependents rarely recognize that they have fallen into a codependent relationship, and others may not recognize it because codependents are good at hiding what is going on at home. I don't know, and I'm obviously aging myself. There's a part in the movie of what was it, Emily uh Bronte, or am I getting that mixed up? Anyways, oh my gosh, the Moors, Heathcliff, um, Kathy, Wuthering Heights. Holy cow. Okay. When Heathcliff marries the neighbor's sister, he's not in love with her. He's in love with Kathy. And sometimes you can look when Heathcliff would be looking in the eyes of his wife, they were they were they were dull, they were dead. His air, his breath, was he survived on Kathy's love. Now, I'm sure many would say that wasn't a codependent relationship, but that's an example, is that somebody's just their every movement is thrives on the acceptance and the needs of somebody else. Living as a codependent is unhealthy and one-sided, with one partner or a person relying on the other to get their needs met. Like I just said, the other person is in a codependent relationship. One of the things you can tell is it encourages codependent behavior by using codependent to enable their behavior, such as substance abuse, or other lifestyle changes that are harmful. And oftentimes they will defend the person. I mean, a codependent could be with somebody who's beating them or doing drugs, and they will swear it's for a healthy reason, a good reason, or because you deserve it. I mean, they have blinders on. A codependent relationship is a closed system. It's almost like a flower that has folded into itself. The relationship is fiercely defended and kept a secret, so it can continue to be unabated. So it can't be challenged. Some symptoms that you may notice on a codependent might be low self-esteem. Now, obviously, if you look at this from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a feeling of belonged, if somebody never felt belonged and they never, and that altered their sense of self, then obviously they don't know who they are, to be, which affects their low self-esteem. They might feel unworthy. They might feel unworthy of themselves, unworthy of the respect for others. They may feel completely ashamed, guilty. They might feel as if they have no confidence in their own decisions. Their worth has to come from somebody else. It could be deep-seated need to please and care for others. It's difficult for codependents to say no, and they feel fearful that they may disappoint whoever it is, whether it's your boss, your coworker, your partner, your parent, whoever you're codependent upon. Lack of adequate boundaries. I mean, and this is for both parties, because when you're in an unhealthy, toxic, dysfunctional relationship, whether you're a codependent or the codependent itself, again, there's no self-esteem to say this is unacceptable. There's very little boundaries or no boundaries. If there are boundaries, they're constantly compromised and jeopardized and negotiated. Oftentimes there's very poor communication skills. Codependent individuals struggle to express themselves, to tell how they feel or what they want, what they need, sadly, what they deserve, because all that they really don't feel like they deserve anything except what you give them, the validation that the person they're codependent upon gives them. There's overreacting. In a codependent relationship, the person is likely to overact emotionally to situations even when they don't deserve them. If you ever tell a codependent and the codependent on you, you're going somewhere and you don't have a list, itemized list of what you're doing, where you're going, and when you come back, you're taking the oxygen away from somebody. Sometimes the codependent relationship may become harmful. And actually, a lot of times it does for various reasons. I mean, really, even if it's not abusive, it's harmful in the sense that, somebody lost themselves. That's harmful in and of itself. Codependents in this case may feel ashamed or too weak to leave their codependent relationship and feel loyalty to their abuser. This is called having a trauma bond. Right here, that's what I was saying before. A trauma bond often occurs when the abuser spins through cycles of abuse and affection. The abuser will treat their partner badly, but always go back and show them affection. So, it's like love bombing, making the relationship extremely difficult to end, because I'm sure you've heard of intermittent rewards. So it's like, you can be in an abusive relationship, but you're waiting for that approval. You're waiting for that feeling of belonging. And those are the intermittent rewards. Not to mention, if you have low self-esteem or no self-esteem, then when somebody gives you attention or makes you feel belonged, that's almost like a drug. That's your high. And as we all know, people that are on drugs are constantly in search of their next high. Trauma bonding, however, can also occur without any abuse or certainly over abuse. One can develop an attachment and loyalty to someone who is not treating the codependent well and abuses their propensity for needing to be needed. Breaking free of the trauma bond is difficult. Oh, it's difficult. Again, it's like asking Heathcliff to stop relying on Kathy's love. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's intense and it's a lot of work and a lot of time. So let's look at some ways to overcome codependency now that we're just talking about what Heathcliff, should or could do. Number one, you have to understand it. And this is difficult because people that are in a codependent relationship, especially a trauma bond, don't believe it. Don't believe it because basically you are separating an addict from its fix. And it's like taking a cat away from catnip. You're going to get scratched and clawed and you name it. But understanding that you grew up in a dysfunctional home and have fallen into codependent relationships sounds simple, but it's not. No one wants to admit that they were either abused or oftentimes a child doesn't want to, they'll have like a moral dilemma because they don't want to admit their parents weren't perfect or were wrong in certain areas, but obviously they were. And certainly nobody ever wants to be somebody else's doormat. So like if you admit to a codependent or a trauma bond relationship, you're admitting that you are a puppeteer to the person that you are codependent upon. So the next one is identifying patterns. Identify patterns in your life the way you would gravitate towards people who need and want a lot of help, and how you have difficulty asking for help. Notice how you depend on others for validation instead of self-validating. So many times we seek external validation. Our validation has to come from within. And I know that's almost impossible with someone who's codependent because they don't have a sense of who am I, a sense of self. So that's very difficult to, what I just said. All right, recognize healthy support. Recognizing people who can support you in your life instead of taking from you is vital to overcoming codependency. One of the things that's very difficult with people that are in trauma bonds or codependent relationships is that they will often, the first people they cut out of their lives are the people that are closest to them. And that's sad because the people that are closest to them are thinking, oh my God, I thought we were close. I thought this. Well, here's the deal. You are a threat to their fix. And so they're going to get rid of you because, as opposed to some other random stranger or cashier, you're the one that could make the most amount of impact in their life because you are closest to them. So, unfortunately, the people that are closest to these people that have trauma bonds or who are codependent, or if you are codependent watching this yourself, you're going to get rid of people that are closest to you. And that could be a sign. So just keep that. Setting healthy boundaries. A boundary is a limit one sets that make people aware when they're doing something that's unacceptable to you. Boundaries are not always easy to set and maintain if you're dealing with deep-seated codependency. You may have to become accustomed to making others feel comfortable instead of recognizing when you are having a hard time setting limits. But here's one of the ways or one of the arrows that you can tell, okay, something's up. Is there some codependency here or a trauma bond? Is when you have a hard time making boundaries, but even more so important than that, enforcing boundaries. I'll just leave it as that for now. Minding your own business. It's critical that you remember that you can only control your own actions. That's it. And your partner is responsible for their own actions and behaviors. Obviously, there's accountability in relationships. Obviously, there's a courtesy. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But everybody's their own autonomy, authentic self. They have autonomy, and they're allowed to be themselves. Now, if you're married, obviously you have to grow together, but our job shouldn't be to control someone, completely change someone, and or can be completely reliant upon someone. Again, if you're married and one person works, the other person stays home, you kind of are relying on, you're relying on one person to pay the bills, and you're relying on the other person to be the CEO of domestic relations, with the house and the kids and the appointments and schedules and all that other stuff. And one of the biggest things I'll say is just you valuing yourself. You have to value yourself, whatever that takes, whether that's, professional help, notebooks, meditation, prayer, you have to work on valuing yourself, which is very difficult if you have no clue who you are. You can't value what you don't realize exists. Codependency and low self-esteem are invaluably linked. I actually wrote a bunch of notes here. I'm not gonna read them, but really valuing yourself, valuing your worth, valuing your time, valuing your mistakes, which a lot of people find difficulty doing. Value who you are as a person. I mean, my God, like, what is it? 1 in 400 trillion chance that you were born, but yet here you are. Obviously, there was some design much bigger than us, whatever you want to call it. And there's a reason for you being here. So, and nobody else can be you. So breaking free from codependency is extremely difficult. Just same thing with trauma bonds. A person, an important person who doesn't deserve to be serving someone else's need while sacrificing your own, that should not exist. Yes, there's negotiation. Yes, there's compromise, but you don't sacrifice your needs to make somebody else. I mean, maybe in a long-term marriage, there's going to be times you sacrifice your needs, but if it becomes a pattern, that's unhealthy, completely unhealthy. If you live your life to please somebody else, I always say this: if you're so busy trying to create peace around you, it's at the expense of the peace within you. So just be mindful of that. Codependency, trauma bonds are very, like I said, difficult to break, but you deserve to live. You deserve freedom. You deserve to live in the here and now. We allow life to happen. When we break free of codependency, we allow life to happen as opposed to trying to force life to happen. We want to make the most of each day, and we want to be mindful of making our own decisions, be mindful that we own what we say and do, we are confident in our decisions, and most important, we are happy making our decisions. So I know I kind of went off on all these different trails and stuff. It's like, a heart that sometimes you have all these veins that are arteries that are going in different areas. So I apologize, but I appreciate you sticking with me during this class. Um, and I hope you got something out of it.